I need to close it real quickly.
Restart the recording.
Yeah, sure. Anyways, you can outline the view again.
Look, just to be clear, I'm debating Shinra. The two judges are Archie and Yanni. Archie's my judge, Yanni's his judge. He's going to be attempting to give a reductio towards the following view. I believe the morality of actions are determined off of the self-interest of the person who's acting upon their self-interest, or in other words, imposing or inflicting an action onto reality. So, what's the reductio?
The person who is acting, and then the self-interest was the...
And just to clarify, Archie, what I'm highlighting is self-interest.
Yeah, okay. A few questions. So one is just going to be like a reductio of a coma patient, right? So imagine you walk into, like, let's say you're really horny, right? And you walk into a hospital, an empty hospital. There's a coma patient. They're obviously alive, right? They're going to become sentient in, like, say 2 hours. But because, you really need to get one out, you decide that you want to use this coma patient, right, as a sex doll. And then somebody comes into the room, right, and attempts to pin you down and say, hey, you shouldn't do that, right? Say, imagine it's a robot, right? And this robot has no interest. It just acts, right? And this robot pins you down to stop you.
Is the robot pinning me down?
Yeah, it's the one pinning you down, man.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, it pins you down to the floor, right? And it stops you from basically raping this unconscious person, right? Do you think, and this is a yes or no, that the robot did something immoral?
I'm not going to answer in a yes or no.
Boy, what the dodge. But...
that's not a dodge, just to be clear. I'm just going to clarify my answer and further elaborate on the answer I gave. So I'll start with a yes or no, sure, but I'm going to elaborate on my answer. You're not just going to ask a question like that and then expect a yes or no to make me look bad. I don't know what fucking shitty debaters you debate, maybe Forks or something. But look,
you had Forks in
tier
3.
Is that supposed to be the question?
Yeah, that's the question.
Is that supposed to be the scenario? So look, at the end there, is that okay?
Yeah, no. Is the robot doing something immoral by stopping you?
Yeah, so it's just a case that he's imposing on the self-interest of an individual. So, relatively, it would be immoral. But generally speaking, meaning that most people believes or has in their self-interest to not win if someone get raped or have their own will or even prior wills imposed on, it would be determined as immoral. But that's only generally speaking. So, individualistically, from a less broad account, it would be immoral.
Okay, give me a second.
Immoral. But most people would consider it... Hold on. Sure. I apologize. It would be moral, but most people would consider it immoral on the end of the raper.
People think it is immoral. Oh, it is moral.
Yup.
Okay.
No. Most people believe that the robot is moral for imposing on the self-interest of someone else because the self-interest that they're trying to act upon, at least the person who's the robot imposing is on, or is trying to impose on, the person that, hold on, chill. The self-interest that they're acting upon is something that's incompatible with the desire that most people in society hold.
Okay. So
due to the incompatibility with the general scope of morality and immorality, it would be something that's moral to do. That being imposing on the self-interest of that person.
Is the reason why okay, so my question is specifically one, what is actually the distinguishing trait here between that person who is getting pinned to the floor and being stopped from raping this unconscious body and any other case of like somebody imposing on somebody else's self-interest, right? What is the actual trait that actually makes imposing on somebody's self-interest in one of these cases? Right, wait, why is he cutting me off already? Right.
I'm answering the question.
I wasn't done, sir. Like you said, I was going to elaborate. So, what is the distinguishing factor here which shows that in one of these cases, right, obviously this action is immoral, right? And I genuinely think that most people, whenever they say this action is immoral, they don't say, oh yeah, this action would be immoral, but until I personally wanted it, then it would be morally justified. In fact, most people would actually say that it is immoral irrespective of whether or not they personally want it, right? So they wouldn't say that, oh yeah, well, I can't really condemn for example, the Nazis, right? Because they were just pursuing their own self-interest, right? In the same way I'm pursuing mine. There's no real way to determine whose self-interest is more valuable, whose self-interest has more value, right? So I'm just questioning, why should I grant that your one individual self-interest is more important than anyone else's?
So look, it's just a case, just a simple answer, just to be clear. It's just a case that there doesn't have to be a value determination when it comes to self-interest versus self-interest, but rather we can just talk about which self-interest is typically acted upon. It's typically acted upon to prevent rape cases rather than actualized rape cases. So it just follows that when someone says that they're imposing on the will of someone else, the determination of whether or not that's okay in comparison to, for example, a policeman stopping a robber from killing something, or I apologize, robbing a store or something like that, the determination is the fact that that's incompatible with the self-interest of most people, rather than, for example, someone raping someone else. So it's just the case that someone raping another person is more incompatible, at least that self-interest is more incompatible with the general scope of people in comparison to the policeman stopping the robber from robbing. Now, when it comes to the other points, when you say that, oh, I can't condemn him.
Wait, can you repeat what you said? Sorry.
Most people, wait, let me finish. Hold on, let me finish.
No, I'm saying I didn't hear you. Can you repeat what you said?
Okay, that's fine. I'll repeat it, but hold on. So look, when we talk about the condemning part, it's just the case that they can say, well, I don't condemn that. Most people would say that, well, this is bad. But why is it bad? It's because of their intuition, which ties into their self-interest. They wouldn't want something like this to happen to them, their family, who they love. This is incompatible with the rest of society due to what people view as good and bad. But why do they view it as good and bad? Because of the self-interest that's built upon within society. So it's just the case that most people don't want to have their will imposed on. However, most people would say, if you ask them, if you did a case study, most people would grant that it would be okay to impose on the self-interest of someone else if it breaks the legal system, due to the legal system being societal laws typically. Now, what's the argument as to why, I'm sorry, can you please admit I wasn't done. What's the argument as to why there's a higher intuition with the other side rather than what I'm saying? And then to repeat the first part, all I said was the determination, not for the value, by the way. Every value, or I apologize, every self-interest can have equal value. But the determination for when people would grant that it's okay to impose on the self-interest of someone in comparison to another person, the determination is simply going to be what the self-interest that you're imposing on is. So if you hold the self-interest to rape another person, most people would say it's okay to impose on the self-interest of wanting to rape on someone else. Stop unmuting him. It's okay to impose on the self-interest of rape for someone else. However, it's not okay to impose on the self-interest of someone who, for example, wants to protect the kid, depending on the context. So, what's the response?
Okay, yeah, there's a few responses I can give, so I'll just start with the first one. So one, your view doesn't actually account for something called moral error. And by moral error, I mean somebody can genuinely express that even though they know all of the facts about their own interests, right? And it's obviously, I don't think you disagree that's logically possible, but like somebody can know all of the facts about their own. Wait. Okay, it's logically possible for somebody to know all of the facts about their own desires, right? And still think that they're in moral error, right? So for you to say that, for example, say I know. Wait. Can I finish? Wait. Can I finish? Can someone mute him, please? Okay. But so say for example, I know all of the facts about how I feel emotionally. I know all of the facts about my own personal desires. I choose to act in a specific way, right? Say for example, I know all of the facts about my desires, and then I choose to go and steal ice cream from the ice cream box, right? And then I acknowledge that what I did was wrong, even though it was currently in my own self-interest, right, to actually take from the ice cream box. I actually honestly acknowledge that what I did was wrong, right, even in the moment of me doing it, right. Under his view, that wouldn't be possible, since actually what is good, right, and what is good and what aligns with your self-interest are identical, right? So you'd have to deny that somebody knowing every single fact about their desires, being aware of it, and still honestly claiming that what they did is morally wrong. That would be gibberish, and it would also be a contradiction, for one. And then two, if you say that all values or all self-interest are equal in terms of value, you'd also have to agree that if there were two people who had it in their self-interest to want to rape somebody, right, in a vacuum, there are three people on an island, two of these people want to molest a woman, right? And one of them doesn't want to. It isn't in their self-interest, right? Since there's two people of value, right? All of them possess equal value. There's two compared to one. It's trivially true that these two people would, these two people's values would take precedence, right? Since again, obviously, they just have more of the thing that they value, right? So again, it just seems to be the case that not only do you have to bite the bullet, right, that in certain cases, rape, murder, all of them are morally justified, right? If somebody told you that, okay, well, what's the moral justification for your claim? You just say, oh, well, I have interest towards it. Not only does it make all moral discourse trivial, right, and clearly we have intuitions towards it not being trivial, right, but it also means that in certain cases, any action can be morally justified, right, and that clearly isn't the case either.
So, look, please mute him while I'm speaking, because for some reason I was unmuted, I didn't talk, and I was muted again. But there's multiple retarded points he made. One, when we talk about isolation, let me clarify for the judges. My morality and plenty of my other views are based upon how society currently is. So obviously, for example, if it were to be the case that we scientifically motivate aliens existing, my moral system is going to be modeled in a way in which fits the scope of aliens. So my current morality is depicted and modeled off of how society currently is, not some random in a void example that is unlikely to occur. That's just clarity on that end. Another thing is, I don't believe that the value of self-interest is determined off of the quantity. So when you say that, well, there's two people who hold one self-interest on the island, and then there's another person who has an opposing self-interest, the two people would take precedence over that person. There's no argument for that at all. I don't believe that the determination of value is just the quantity. What I said was, if you're conflating what I said initially, what I said earlier was, and listen to this point this time, please, retard. What I said earlier was that most people would consider X bad. In that sentence, did I at all comment on the quantity, entailing that there's a value distinction between the self-interest of 10 people and then the self-interest of one person? No, it's just the case that to avoid quote-unquote, you bit the bullet, It's just a case that to avoid that retarded ass comment, I specified how there's a generality in which disagrees with that one person, meaning that generally it would be incorrect, or at least relativistically, generally it would be incorrect. But there is nothing in which talks about
Wait, I'm sorry.
quantity at all.
Wait, Infinity, I'm sorry. Is it okay if you could repeat? I didn't hear that initially. My bad.
Repeat what?
Your response, yeah, sure.
Okay, look, so this is just clarity. My moral system is modeled off of how society currently is, not unlikely events, not random examples. Obviously, for example, if aliens were to be scientifically motivated to exist currently, my moral system would be modeled in a way in which is able to fit them aliens into, obviously. So when he says on an isolated island or in a void, etc., it's just the case that my moral system is not modeled off of those. Additionally, I don't believe that the quantity of self-interest is what attributes to their value. So it's just not the case that he has an argument as to why the determination of value when it comes to the self-interest is based upon the quantity. He said this when he came to his example. Well, under your view, the two people who have the self-interest to rape the one person who doesn't want to get raped, the two people would have the self-interest and that would take precedence over the one person. I don't grant that at all. That's just a presupposition. So it's just the case that, in my view, it would be immoral to rape that person due to the imposition of will existing. Specifically, that's incompatible with most people. That's the distinction that I gave. The symmetry breaker between the two examples that you gave, or at least that I gave as an example, would be what the self-interest is. And that's only for what people consider immoral. Not what actually is immoral, quote unquote, but what people consider immoral. That's what the symmetry breaker is for, what people would consider immoral. Why is it the case that one person would consider the imposition of will to be immoral in this scenario, but not the other scenario? It's just, the answer is because one self-interest is incompatible with most people, the other self-interest is not incompatible with most people, okay? Now, with the candy stuff, look, I don't believe, honestly, one, let me clarify. I believe that morality is subjective. I just believe ethical egoism provides the most consistent language and description towards morality in comparison to every other normative view. There's no argument as to why any other normative view has as much consistency as something such as ethical egoism, specifically rational individual ethical egoism. So that's why I talk about ethical egoism. But there is no argument as to why it's logically possible for someone to honestly, meaning that they present, let's say ethical egoism is true, because you said under my view. So this isn't like a question bag or anything like that, because he's assuming under my view that, well, this person can't do this, blah, blah, blah. So under my view, let's assume that this person 100% believes in ethical egoism. I don't believe that it is honest for them to say that this was a bad action if it's in line with the pleasure that they have. Now, to finish, the reason why I would think that they would say it's a bad outcome or action that they performed is because it's generally not being accepted to steal things. But why do people not generally accept things getting stolen or thieves? Well, it's because they would not like to see things stolen from themselves, or they don't like to see other people unhappy or unhappy, or they just want to preserve the self-interest of specific people, which is completely fine. Is that incompatible with someone simply holding to, well, honestly, this was a bad action generally, meaning that they make the claim, but the claim is irrelevant when it comes to the position. You can be a moral realist, for example. You can say something along the lines of God exists, and then believe that God exists 100%, and then you can assert that God doesn't exist. Obviously, what you say doesn't hold any bearing to reality, which is why you specified honestly, or honesty. But if they're honest, it's just the case that if they believe my position, if there is a self-interest in which outweighs, let's say, the self-interest of pleasure that you get from eating ice cream, if that outweighs the self-interest of not stealing or fitting under a social fucking worm or something like that, then it is the case that it would be moral. So there's no possibility there under someone who 100% believes the consistency of ethical egoism and ethical egoism itself. So it's just the fact that they're making a claim rather than what is actually true of ethical egoism, and it just wouldn't respond to the point. So when you say, well, it wouldn't account for moral error, it's just not true.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm done speaking.
Yeah. So there's a few things I want to go over. One, you prefaced your argument by saying that you do not take into account cases which do not happen in real life, or you base your morality off of like currently. You said verbatim you base your values off of current society.
I said my morality is modeled currently off of society, how it currently is. That doesn't mean I don't take into account examples. It's just the case that my morality is not modeled off of that.
Yeah, okay, so before I continue on, I just have a question. When you say it's modeled after society, do you mean that you adopt their standards, or do you mean that the only cases in which your moral system applies to is cases which occur within reality?
Wait, hold on. It's just adopted. I'm adopting my standards to how society currently is. Like, for example, it's epistemically impossible, and this is just an example, so don't question this, but it's epistemically impossible for aliens to exist. Therefore, I'm not going to model my moral system off of the existence of aliens. But if I were to gain new information, like, for example, aliens existing, meaning that the epistemic impossibility is refined, it's just the case that morality is going to be remodeled. But that's irrelevant currently. It's just the void example is dumb. That's why I mentioned that.
Yeah, okay.
To the overall points.
Yeah, okay. So I don't have any more questions. I'm just going to make the point now. So again, one, I didn't really hear much clarity as to what you specifically mean whenever you say that you model your values off of what how society currently is. I know you brought up the alien example where you say that, wait, no, don't worry. I think it's fine. But what's it called? I know you brought up the alien example where you said that, in the case of an alien, right, it would be morally or you wouldn't take into account aliens for your moral system, and the reason being because it's epistemically impossible, right? Again, it just doesn't get clear at all on what you specifically mean whenever you say you model your thing around them, right? That's one. And then two, secondly, you said that the reason as to why it's wrong in these cases, right? I hate this kid, right? But you said supposedly that all self-interests are equally valuable. So then my question is specifically, if all self-interests...
You cut out.
Yeah, okay, hello? Am I still cutting out? Yeah.
Well, it might be me, but continue.
Yeah, so, okay, you said that all self-interests are equally valuable, right? And now my question is, okay, well, if all self-interests are equally valuable...
Yo, is he cutting out for y'all or me, bro?
Yo, it's just you, my nigga, it's just you.
Did you not? Well, I'm not asking you, see, but Zinni, did he cut out for you?
I mean, he's cutting out here and there, but you can...
Yeah, he cut out whenever he said... Yeah, just repeat yourself again.
Yeah, okay, so look... I'm just gonna say like plainly. One, it's like a yes or no before I continue. Right? Actually, no. You can respond after. It's just yes or no. Do most people have in their self-interest towards aligning with the self-interest of the majority? Right? And if that's a yes to that question, that leads me to the further point. If most people say it is within their self-interest to align with the self-interest of most people, right? Then you'd in a sense just be committing yourself to to utilitarianism, right? Because again, under utilitarian semantics or under like utilitarian viewpoint, right, they also think that it's in most people's self-interest to maximize pleasure, right? And if it's in most people's self-interest to maximize pleasure, right, and most people have self-interests towards like abiding with the majority, you would also have to say that it is in most people's self-interest to maximize pleasure. So that would just turn into a utilitarian view automatically, for one. And then two, if you commit to a utilitarian, or if you commit to the view that all like
Look, I'm gonna answer this. No,
hold on. I was in the middle of my sentence. I was in the middle of my sentence. Hello, I was in the middle of my sentence.
I know, bro. Archie, bro. Can we like please move on from this?
I was in the middle of my sentence. Hello, like what's going on? I was in the middle of my sentence. Dude. I didn't do this for your point, bro. Can someone mute him, bro? Can someone mute him? Can someone mute him? Thank you. Don't know what that was about, right? Just started speaking. That was scary. Anyways, right, but look, one, if he does not think specifically, right, that most people have self-interest towards abiding with the majority. That's fine, right? Then if it was true that most people do not have self-interest towards abiding with the majority, or following what most of the majority think, right? Then why is it the case that most people follow the law, right? Like, do people not follow the law because of the fact that if the law is applied universally, right? Or most people agree to it, for one, right? Which is why we have democracies, right? And then two, if the law is abided okay, if the law is abided by universally, it will benefit the most amount of people, right? That's one. And then two, it's like, okay, if you have two things, right, in which you think are intrinsically valuable, right, and if both of those things supposedly are intrinsically valuable, and you have more compared to like a case in which you have two things which are intrinsically valuable, isn't it not trivially true that those three things of intrinsic value have more value, right? And the second thing is, you just have no good argument for personal identity. And what I mean by this is that I don't think you can provide me a solid. Shush. Okay.
Doing,
Bro, he's not cutting out.
Yeah.
Yes, he really is, bro. Zinni just said he was cutting out. It's
Yeah,
just
man.
the wise people saying he's not cutting out.
Okay, but look,
Your mic is ass.
I'm just gonna repeat it. So I don't think you have a good argument for for like personal
No,
identity.
repeat what you said before that, bro.
Okay, if you have three things which are morally valuable intrinsically, you have like compared to two things, then it's obvious that these three things of moral value, right, would supersede or be more valuable than those two things, right? But
Shinra, really quick. I was gonna say, I just wanted to make sure that I heard this correctly because I was talking to someone in my background, right? So I didn't entirely hear what you were saying because my headset was cutting out. The last thing I heard you were saying is that if he commits himself to whatever, that he would have to essentially explain the distinction between his view and utilitarianism because they would seemingly be aligning with the same commitments. And then after that, I didn't hear.
After that was what I was about to get into. And what I was about to get into is just that he has no good argument for the self-existing. So what I mean by that is, when you say that, what is good or what is bad is based off of my own self-interest. One, what do you mean when you say self? Do you mean that there's a set of properties that you have, right, that remain stagnant over time? Okay, that remains stagnant over time, that like allows you to have self-interest, or that allows you to have interest over time. If it is not the case that you do not have interest over time, and in fact these interests, right, or the quote-unquote self in this context is changing constantly, then I want to know, how would you like respond to this sort of hypothetical where, for example, I have a desire, right, and this desire is I and only I, so nobody else should eat the ice cream. And because I have, because there's no strong foundation for personal identity, right? The me I am right now and the me who ate the ice cream are two completely different people. So now I do not act upon my own self-interest. Therefore, is me doing any action immoral, right? If I have desires that only I should do them, trivially that just doesn't seem to be true. And the last part is just look. If you believe that most people have ethical ego semantics, right? I just want to know, how would you actually explain the fact that most people actually praise altruism as an ethical, or altruistic acts as ethical sorts of acts, right? Compared to like saying that they're doing something that's viciously immoral, right? Because they are sacrificing themselves and they're not allowing themselves to have any more self-interest in the future. But yeah, that's basically it.
Look, bro, it's the same shitty ass Yanni point. Someone can have the self-interest to preserve their legacy, and their legacy can outweigh their, for example, current life. So someone can have the self-interest, in other words, to have their name still remembered after death rather than their current life. They can just have that self-interest outweigh the other. You can have two self-interests, but have one of them outweigh the other. That's completely fine. Another thing is, I believe that when the essentials are translated to a distinct moment, it's the case that your essence, or in other words, your identity is still translated to the distinct moment. So it can be the case that you have the self-interest to witness the happiness of someone else's under ethical egoism. That doesn't mean that you just have the self-interest to only please yourself. What the fuck? In the sense in which you don't please anybody else. You can please both yourself and someone else. And then what I mean by self in the self-interest phrase is just you. It's just identical with you. So self is you. What I mean by self-interest is just the self-interest that you personally have. It's what you personally account for. It's what you personally desire. What you personally will to be the case. It's simple as that. Also, mute Shinra real quick. I was muted that entire time. Okay, so when you talk about the three things, brother, that's irrelevant. There's no argument for the three things. The law benefiting most people is something I can grant, which is completely fine. Does that mean that due to the law benefiting most people, a lot of people try to have the self-interest in which is possessed or in line with other people's self-interest? No. It's just the case that the law ultimately is able to enforce or announce what most people would like to occur. Like, for example, the protection of one's family. Let's say someone has a self-interest to protect their family because their family brings them happiness. It is the case that the murder was allowed or something along the lines of that. Then those people, the person specifically who has the self-interest to protect their family, it will be much harder for that self-interest to be actualized when it comes to the protection of the family, because a lot of murders are going to be running a spree. That's just an example. Now, it is the case that someone can even disagree with the law, but the punishments that are not granted from themselves or by themselves, but rather the punishments that are granted by other people outweigh the disagreement with the law. So they can want to murder another person. However, the law announces that murder is illegal, obviously. So the people who enforce that law are going to come out and seek out for that person and then punish them. So someone can have the self-interest in which is incompatible with the law, but due to the punishments that come from the law being broke, someone can have, and I apologize, suppress the self-interest. That's completely fine. And then when you say that most people have the intuition which is not accounted for by my moral language, there's no argument for that. You keep on talking about this intuition shit. There's no argument for that. Additionally, when you say that the point of my moral system being modeled off of current society, when you say that point is unclear, it's only unclear to you because you're retarded. You have no reason as to why it's unclear. I'm pretty sure Archie understood it, which is who I was talking to. I was just clarifying to the judge. I don't care if you understand it. I didn't expect you to. Even though I clarified after you asked the question. It's simple. My morality currently is applied to standards in which exist within society. Aliens don't exist within society currently. Epistemically, at least. What I know, it does not exist within society currently. So my moral system does not account for things such as aliens, or it might account for things such as aliens, but my moral system standards are not something that is supposed to be aware of aliens, at least. So it can indirectly account for something such as aliens, but it's not supposed to acknowledge aliens' existence. In other words, be aware of aliens' existence. Okay? So let me get this real quick. I'm not doing my point. Okay, I'm going to send this study after, if I even need it. But just to be clear, when you say that I would be, well, I already responded to this, but I would like to clarify this to the judge again. When you say that I would be committing to a utilitarianistic view, that's just not the case. Why? Because I don't believe that most people attempt to have a self-interest in which is in line with other self-interests. What I believe, though, however, and listen, because there's a clear distinction, is that most people's self-interests ultimately are in line with other people's self-interest. So trying to be in line and then being in line are distinct. So it's not the case that people are attempting to maximize the utility of society, but rather people have self-interests in which are in line with each other's. Like, for example, let's say someone has the desire or the self-interest to seek out the protection of their family. It's just the case that it's intuitively true that it's much easier to protect your family in a society where everybody wants to protect their family rather than in a society where not everybody wants to protect their family. So in a possible world where someone wants to protect their family, however, there's murders loose, or your neighbor is not your friend or something along the lines of that, it would be much harder to protect your family rather than in a possible world where you have the desire to protect your family, but your neighbor is your friend and your neighbor shares that desire. So it's just the case that teamwork makes the dream work. It's just trivially true. So no, there's no utilitarianistic view there that you can posit at all, that you can draw from anything I said. It's just the case that it seems to be the language is still something that stands. The personal identity argument is just your essentials gets translated to every single mode in which you exist in, or else you wouldn't be you. If it's the case that you wouldn't be you, ethical egoism wouldn't fail at all. It's just that actions aren't performed by an individual, meaning that it's just the case that there's no moral acts that are being actualized, or there's no morality or moral statements or propositions which are being actualized. But that's independent of the claim, because I don't even believe in that theory of identity. So that wouldn't follow. Nothing you said actually translates to the identity theory. Nothing you said actually translates to this utilitarianistic identity, or I apologize, view. It just all falls back onto legal laws, which are fine to exist under an ethical egoist view. It's just the case that legal laws can be followed by people because it can, at least the punishment that's granted from the breaking of those legal laws can outweigh the self-interest, as I've already said, the self-interest of the person who would like to break those legal laws, or the legal system is both compatible with most people's self-interest, and it is the case that the legal systems are built upon a social construct usually. So everything I said follows. Please respond.
Yeah, okay. Don't know why he started singing at the end, but one, you said at the start of your statement that his self-interest to survive, or his self-interest to like have his legacy passed on, actually outweighs his self-interest to survive. But that's actually just a blatant contradiction with what you said earlier, right? Because what you said earlier specifically was just that all self-interests are equally valuable. So again, I don't understand how you could actually reconcile the view that all self-interests are equally valuable, but one person's self-interest to survive can actually outweigh their self-interest to do another action at another moment in time, right? So it seems like a straightforward contradiction, right? That's one. And then two, my question is there even any argument as to why? Like, is there an empirical case? Is there like a hypothetical you can give me as to why specifically the reason why we praise self-interest, or we say that it's like self-sacrifice, is morally justified in some cases? Is it not the reason why that it just minimizes harm rather than just it aligns with this person, the person who's doing the act self-interest, or other people who are doing the act self-interest? It's simply just because of the fact that it reduces harm, right? Which can be accounted for under a multitude of normative theories rather than actually egoism. So again, I don't understand why we'd grant that egoism in this context has more explanatory power, for one. And then two, I'd like the argument as to why essence exists, right? Well, so we need to get clear on what essence is, right? Then we need to get clear on why it exists. Right? Again, I don't think you have any argument for that, right? Most people, I'd like to say, like specifically, most people do not have preferences towards towards being remembered over being alive. If I gave you the option of going down in history forever, right, and the price was I shoot you in the head right now and you die, then clearly, clearly, like, the option is quite clear, right? You would obviously pick the one where you're able to survive rather than the option where people remember you forever. Because obviously, why would you even place any sort of value onto people remembering you if you aren't even there to experience it, right? Also, the reason why your usage of basing it off of society is unclear, right, is because I didn't understand it, right? Like, and to be clear, I asked you to outline the view for me to understand and refute properly, right? So if your views or if your semantics are unclear to me, the person who's trying to refute it, hold on, why are you cutting me off, boy? Anyways, but did someone disconnect him from the call? Okay. But also, you brought up a hypothetical that just didn't exist in the real world, and it's like, you criticized me and said specifically that I'm doing something wrong because your morality is based off of current society, so it is wrong for me to bring up a hypothetical or something that doesn't exist. But you proceeded to do the exact same thing later on. Also, one, why would I even grant that no moral propositions? Shush. Why would I grant that no moral propositions are true if eliminativism about people is true? Don't know why I would grant that. And yeah, the hypothetical specifically was what's it called? Oh no, specifically the example was, oh yeah, if I was in a society where people didn't value taking care and protecting their family, right? It would be harder for me to protect my family in this hypothetical. So therefore, it would be morally justified for me to actually live in a society where they value saving their families in this hypothetical, right? And it's like, trivially true, those sorts of situations don't exist in the real world, right? So again, you're obviously walking back your initial argument. You can give a response. If I don't think it addresses anything, we can just conclude.
Well, yeah, that's how you determine whether or not you would like to conclude, whether or not there's an argument given in which we'll respond to it. Look, please mute him so I can respond to those shitty points. Shinra. Thank you. So, one, you said I was contradicting myself about the self-interest. Let me clarify. The self-interest, and maybe you weren't listening or something to use your context clues. What I said, just to be clear, was the fact that people's self-interest, meaning person to person, have the equal value. So, for example, the quantity of the self-interest relative to the amount of people does not determine the value of the self-interest. Retard, meaning that, for example, let's say you have two people who share the same self-interest, and there's one person who disagrees. It would just follow that under what I say, that two people or those two people would not have a self-interest in which outweighs the other person's self-interest. However, you can have self-interest in which outweighs the, like, for example, let's say the self-interest you have possessed are based upon the pleasure you would get from the attempt to actualize the action or the actualization of the action. You can say one thing has more pleasure than another thing. Therefore, this self-interest I take to outweigh the other self-interest when it comes to performing it. In my opinion, I like Takis over hot Cheetos. Therefore, the self-interest to possess Takis over hot Cheetos is clear to have a favor. I'm going to outweigh Takis over hot Cheetos or hot fries whenever I'm able to choose because one grants me more pleasure. That's not to say at all that there is a value distinction when it comes to people and their self-interest, but rather the self-interest under an individualistic perspective, which is not what I talked about initially. Now, when we talk about when a person wants to reduce harm, is it not the case that when someone wants to reduce harm, that they hold the self-interest to want to reduce harm? So when you say, well, in a scenario, it could just be the case that they want to reduce harm, or we see it's more likely they just want to reduce harm. Okay, they can want to reduce harm, or they can self-sacrifice to reduce harm. It's just the case that the action that they have, or the self-interest that they have, I apologize, is in line with reducing harm. They want to see as less harm as possible. So they self-sacrifice to stop themselves or avoid seeing harm, which is completely fine. That's still in their self-interest. You saying that this hypothetical scenario can not only be explained within ethical egoism, but in multiple normative theories or multiple narrative views does not defeat ethical egoism at all. Just because there's one hypothetical on which can be explained or accounted for under multiple hypotheses when it comes to normativity, ethics related specifically, doesn't mean that ethical egoism is false or anything. Let's say, for example, ethical egoism is able to provide a consistent account for 3 hypotheticals, while every other ethic or every other normative view is able to give an account or explanation towards one view or one situation. Okay, ethical egoism is more consistent, which is the claim I made going into this debate. So it seems to be the case that there's no reductive that you've applied that successfully inferred the conclusion of ethical egoism's inconsistency or just flaw in this. And then in response to the other points, my bad. When you say that most people have the preference to preserve the current life over being remembered, that's not the point. It's just the case that under scenarios we can give an explanation towards why someone would self-sacrifice could be, meaning that not in every single scenario, but an explanation as to why someone would self-sacrifice can be based upon them wanting to be remembered. So when you say, well, why would someone want to be remembered? I don't know why someone would want to be remembered over their own life, their own preservation of life. People just have different values, what they more really consider differently. It's not the case that I need to give an answer to the question, which is the following. Well, why would someone rather preserve their name or legacy throughout history rather than their life? I don't need to give an answer to that. Someone can have a fucking answer that's independent of my reason. So when you say, well, most people, it's just the case that most people would not even self-sacrifice in the first place. There's less people, you can't show this, by the way. There's less people in the world who would self-sacrifice probably over people who would self-sacrifice. And if you believe that there is more people, and then you attribute it to the reduction of harm, it would be the case that, retard, they have the self-interest to reduce harm. So, look, when you say I'm assuming an explanation, well, you didn't make this claim, but if you were to say I'm assuming an explanation, it's just the case that the hypotheticals you're giving are undetermined and explanations are able to be granted. So obviously my view is going to be modeled off of the explanations that are able to be granted rather than random undetermined systems that don't seem to apply to reality via your evidence, which is currently zero, zip, none. So there is no fucking response you can give. And then go ahead, prove they don't exist in the world. Do you not believe it's the case that most people have a self-interest in which ultimately boils down to a feature in which applies pleasure to them? And that's in line with a lot of people. So it's just the case that most people would like to preserve their family life, would like to preserve their dog, etc. That's much easier. It's just the case that it's much easier in a world where everybody's on your side, or a lot of people are on your side, rather than when everybody disagrees with each other and nobody's on your side. And then simply, for the argument when it comes to essence, look, essence is just going to be the set of your properties. It's the case that you have a property, or in other words, an identifying feature, therefore, biconditionally and analytically, essence exists. If you don't exist, essence doesn't exist. Or I apologize, if essence doesn't exist, you don't exist. Essence exists, therefore. So there's 2 things, and I'm going to type this out. Archie, can you look at scans? So, if essence doesn't exist, then Shinra doesn't exist. Verify. Then Shinra doesn't exist. Shinra exists, therefore, essence exists. So that's just the case for essence. Simple. Now, and obviously that's what I mean by essence. I don't care about some idiosyncratic definition you can give. It's just the case that essence is just a set of all your properties. And even if you don't believe it's a set of all your properties, I even clarified earlier, because I don't care to argue upon that right now, whether or not accidentals are included within essence. We can even talk about the set of all your essential properties, which is completely fine as well. But maybe we could talk about that. Yeah, I don't really care. But look, for the final point, ethical egoism can be true independent of actions being performed within reality. Ethical egoism can be true with just the possession of self-interest. It can be the case that the morality of actions are determined off of self-interest, independent of whether or not people are performing actions. So it could be possible that people are performing actions, or it could be possible that people are able to perform actions, but people not perform actions, and ethical egoism still holds to be true. That's still completely fine. It's even possible that ethical egoism is true and consistent, independent of people performing actions, or even being possible performing actions, because the actions, if in some possible order they're being performed, are just based upon the self-interest of the individual or of the individual. So it doesn't seem to me that you can give any normative view which is as consistent as ethical egoism or consistent at all. If you have to give a reductio towards ethical egoism, which is what Yanni and Rizhan also failed to do. So what is the argument and motivation that you have rather than just saying random shit? Go ahead.
Okay, the first thing is hello, am I lagging? Yeah, so the first thing is your claim about the essence, the syllogism. Am I lagging? Hello?
No, you're not lagging.
Okay, yeah, so the claim about your essence, the essence thing, begs the question because it assumes that there's a fixed self, right? When you say, oh yeah, if essence doesn't exist, Shinra doesn't exist, I'm not even sure if that follows, because the term Shinra could be used to be referring to a set of properties which people perceive to actually be constant throughout. So in fact, identity, you could say that identity is actually a social fiction, right? Where people use identity to actually refer to a set of properties that they consistently observe, or at least they believe they consistently observe, right? Which is like already given this certain sort of category or title, such as like a name. So say for example a football, right? Obviously you say something is a football, right? Even if I tear open the football, rip it open and change its color, change all of its properties, but as long as it is still in a spherical shape, even though I change all of the properties that it has, right, except for one, it would still be considered to be a football, right? And clearly, like, so in the football case, you could say that, oh yeah, well, that at least that is what makes people refer to it in that specific manner, right? So again, your syllogism just begs the question. The second thing is like, look, okay, most people, it's trivially true. Most people think self-sacrifice is morally justified. So take the example of a mother sacrificing her life to save her children, right? Nobody would say that she is doing something morally wrong, right? For if a mother sacrifices her life to save her children, even though you could say that she's like, or even though you could say, oh yeah, she's acting against her own self-interest. In fact, you can imagine a case where a mother, it's in none of her self-interest at all to save her children, yet she still saves her children anyway, right? It doesn't seem as if she'd be doing something seriously morally wrong, right? If she saved the children, regardless of her own personal interest, for one. Then two, you keep claiming that your view is the most consistent view, right? And it has the least amount of contradiction. So I'm going to offer you a normative ethical view, and I'm going to need you to actually explain why your view has more explanatory power and why your view accounts for more people's intuitions compared to it. So the view is literally just act utilitarianism. Why is it the case that egoism actually accounts for most people's intuitions in comparison to act utilitarianism? I don't think you'll be able to give a proper analogy for that. And then the second thing is like, look, okay, you said that interpersonal self-interest, right? So self-interest from person to person, right? They are all equally valuable, but self-interest for one person specifically, right? There could be a difference in values. It just seems as if that's special pleading. What is true, right, for your own personal self-interest that is not true when you compare two different people's self-interest, that makes it the case that these two different people have equal or their self-interests are equally valuable, but the self-interest that one person have, right, Jesus Christ, the self-interest that specifically one person have, they could have a differential in value. You brought up specifically you brought up like, oh yeah, well, I have conflicting desires, I have desires, right, and these desires are what actually determines, well, right, or what actually determines people's like, or the values of people's specific like self-interest. So again, I just ask you, why is it the case that we apply these sort of standards, that if this one aligns more with my desire, or if this one creates more pleasure, then it's morally justifiable, right? What's it called? Or then it takes precedence. Why is it the case that we apply this sort of principle to our own desires, right? Rather than like apply it to the desires of like everyone generally. It just seems as if it's special pleading. The last thing is, the distinction between those two, right? Or the distinction between interpersonal self-interest and self-interest within the same person is just completely arbitrary, right? So yeah.
I don't gotta use dick, baby. I can put nut on my hands for God. Bitch, that I fuck they burn. Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, shit, are you slamming? Yeah, let's go. Bitch, 1,
shot.
American nigga 0. Let's fucking go, man. Yo, shit, I fucking love you, man.
Damn.
Let's fucking go, man. I was gonna take this time to say fuck Anthony, fuck Brady, fuck Candace. Jimbo, what other nigga got, yo? CGI.
Yeah, okay, look,
Hey,
so
shout out to
please
the
respond, Shinra and C real quick. Let me respond to the shitty points that were given. When he talks about me begging question with the, or hold on, begging the question with the argument real quick. Is he muted? I bet. Look, if essence doesn't exist as a concept, then Shinra doesn't exist, Shinra exists, therefore essence exists. Look, when you say that we can remove all the accidentals, because all you're removing is the accidentals of the football, and then still call it a football because of the essential existing, and this is what I'm claiming, the essential still exists, which is the shape of the football. That's most likely, at least in the example, what makes it a football. People can still call it a football, but people can call it whatever they want. The name is independent of the features. So it can be the case that I ascribe the football the name Single Phoenix or Shikio, but it's still a football due to its essentials. Now, the football in name is irrelevant. We can call it anybody or anything, like I said. It's just this is the thing that we use to describe the specific set of properties in which it holds. Usually things are named off of the essentials that they hold. But look, that's just what I take essence to be. When you say that, well, people, society can have a fictional identity that they ascribe to things. It's just the case that the fictional identity is still applied or based upon sets of features that they have. Meaning that it's irrelevant to what I'm saying. As long as you agree and concede to the fact that properties, features, things in which you're able to identify objects off of still exist, it's just the case that my view can follow when it comes to what essence is. Single Phoenix feature, Mike. I don't know why you want me to do that. But anyways, it's just the case that if you grant all these things existing, features, properties, objects, etc., then my view of essence can pass by. You don't have to agree that's what essence is, but that's just what my view of essence is. When you say I'm question begging on a definition, if that's what you were to say, that's just something that doesn't exist. So what's the argument as to why what I presented within scans, having a question bag or assumption, you can't justify the assumption at all? Now, what the fuck? Look, the reason when it comes to, let me clarify what ethical egoism. The debate is whether or not you have a reductio towards ethical egoism's consistency. So I don't need to explain anti-utilitarianism because it's on your burden. You're the one affirming the reductio existing towards egoism. So you being incapable of doing that and then trying to defend, or trying to apply burden to me, which is the following. Well, explain why all these positions don't actually have an explanation for every single scenario or as many explanations as ethical egoism. There's no argument you can give, brother. You're the one who asserted a reductio, meaning absurdity or contradiction, existing when it comes to fucking ethical egoism. Additionally, in response to this, Archie, let me clarify. It just doesn't seem to be the case that utilitarianism is something in which, is something in which has more explanatory power towards scenarios. So the reason why I'm not an utilitarianistic person, but rather an ethical egoist person, individually, at least.
You mean utilitarianist? Or just a utilitarian?
I don't know what he just said, but anyways, to finish what I was saying, the reason why rather than utilitarianism, I posit ethical egoism is because of the seemings and the intuition that exists from reality. My intuition, and seemingly most people's intuitions, don't point towards utilitarianism. So he has to give the motivation for the view of utilitarianism, if that's what he's going to assert. which he cannot do, because all he can do is ask questions, hence the Q&A. And then, in response to the other point, it's just the case that the distinction, or in other words, the symmetry breaker between the two examples is that in one scenario, and I'm going to clarify this and repeat this for the judge, in one scenario, one person's morality, meaning the morality of that person, is determined off of the self-interest that they possess, and the actions, at least. Meaning that if there's actions which align with their self-interest in which that they're attempting to perform, then if they are basing their self-interest off of which one grants them more pleasure, there's a self-system there of codification. However, that self-system of codification is not something that's equivalent or applicable to the scenario where there's two people, meaning that we're not trying to determine which one brings more pleasure to the individual, but we're just talking about the self-interest of both people, the self-interest that they share specifically. So due to the self-interest that they share specifically, it's just the case that there's nothing in which says that quantity is something that determines the value of the self-interest individualistically or even paired up together. But when it comes to the value of an individualistic self-interest that one person holds, it's going to be relativistic. So what are we talking about when it comes to value? Okay, which one holds more value is which one brings more pleasure to me. So the scenario where someone has a self-interest in which outweighs another self-interest is going to be based upon which one brings more self-interest to them. But when we're talking about which self-interest has more value in a scenario where there's two people with a shared self-interest, if we're not talking about the morality of that person, but rather which self-interest is more moral to act upon, we're not talking about self-codification. So what's going to be the argument as to why there is value that exists there, at least a distinguishment in value? There is no argument. In response to the other points, we have to type this out for you as well. Well, this nigga just said, there's a distinction between interpersonal interest and interest. It's arbitrary. Your reason's arbitrary. I don't care about you making a fucking claim. There's no argument for the fucking claim being true.
Yeah, tell him the arm does nothing.
Archie, look at skins. Bro, chill, bro. I don't even know who that was, but. Okay. Actually, hey Archie, you're looking at skins.
Wait, really quick, Infinity. What I didn't hear because I was typing something. What was your distinction between act utilitarian, or not distinction, but what was your response towards him saying act utilitarianism is more, or why couldn't it be more intuitive? Like, what's the reason why intuitism?
Yeah. So when it comes to the intuition account, it's just the case that isn't what the topic is. The topic is whether or not there exists a reductio for ethical egoism. So when he says there's a failed explanation when it comes to the intuition of act utilitarianism, there's no argument for that. You're just going to burn the shit. There's no argument for that at all. Secondly, it just seems to follow, at least, that within my head, I've observed less people pointing towards, when it comes to morality and actions that they promote, points towards utilitarianism rather than ethical egoism. So there's no argument he can give for that. I just have seemings and personal intuition. He can't grant any actual justified intuition on the side of utilitarianism. Therefore, utilitarianism is not something that I believe to be relevant here. Now, to finish with the sacrifice point, when he says, most people believe self-sacrifice is justified morally. And Archie, please listen to this point. This is very important. I never made a comment about the unjustification or injustification of the morality of self-sacrifice. That's not what I commented on at all. It can be the case that the self-sacrifice of someone is completely morally justified. But the reason as to why it's morally justified, under my view, is obviously going to be reduced down to self-interest. You have yet to give it explanatory power in which it's independent of self-interest that would grant some type of power towards the conclusion, retard, and this nigga's making pose as if he doesn't have biased people in VC, but that is independent of, listen Archie, independent of self-interest within a scenario. Name a single thing when it comes to explanatory power in which fits under something independent of self-interest. And I'm going to repeat that, independent of self-interest, so you can actually fucking answer and understand the point. You can't. So someone can say that it's moral or it's morally justified to preserve, or I apologize, it's morally justified to self-sacrifice because you're preserving the future self-interest or the current self-interest of the individual you're self-sacrificing for. Or someone can say that they have their own self-interest in self-sacrifice because they want to reduce the harm within the vicinity, which is also completely fine. But if you see and understand, it follows that both scenarios talks about reducibility to self-interest, whether it's self-interest of the person or self-interest of the two persons that they're saving. can have the self-interest to protect other people, have the self-interest to protect the happiness of other people, reduce the harm of other people, etc. I just have the intuition for this. There's every single scenario you can give seems to be able to boil down to ethical egoism, while in a situation where we're talking about act utilitarianism, you got nothing. So can we please conclude this social fiction rat shit that he tried to bring up does not at all contain anything, because as long as features exist, we can create a set of features, and if a set of features exists, then it would follow that essence, under my view, exists. If he disagrees with my definition of essence, that's completely fine. He can call it whatever he wants. But what I take essence to be simply is just a set of one's properties. Whether it's essentials, all essentials, or essentials and accidentals. It's just a case that obviously, intuitively as well, if there's a football and someone changes all its accidentals but the essentials remains the same, people would say the football changed. It lost features that it had. And obviously I believe that the essence is composed of all the features one thing has. So what's the response? Can we conclude?
No, we can't. Yeah, there's a few responses. So one, I'd first like to start off my statement by saying I hate Aeroflame, right? Because I need to support the great nation of Africa, right? But that's one. And then two,
Great.
Okay, then two, I need semantics on accidental and essential properties. Now, if you're just saying essential proproperties are what makes...
Look, so
hold on, boy. What in the world? Anyways,
Hold on. I server muted him that time because it's crazy to be like server mute him while he's talking and then you talk while he's talking.
Oh wait, no.
But you got to give him the same.
Yeah, like literally, boy.
Let me clarify. He's the one who moderation, so I would like the moderation.
Yeah.
He's the one who moderation.
100%. But you have to moderate. He's not moderating fairly if only one of you is being server muted when the other one's talking. Either give it to both or let you niggas fight. That's the way it should be run. Or it's a biased debate. Period. Like, regardless.
Okay, no
that's all the input I had.
Look, the guy thrives on no moderation. Why would I ever allow that to happen?
Look, so if you're trying to limit me because you're scared, that's fine. But I want to talk to Ghetto Jin as the moderator.
I'm trying to finish my sentence.
Bro.
Ghetto Jin as the moderator.
No. Okay, I'm going to. Okay, look, boy.
Ghetto Jin, can I?
No, bro. Both of y'all be quiet. I told y'all earlier when I agreed to moderate. I'm tired of shit. I'm trying my best. And listen, I was doing good earlier, but it didn't happen. Like, I went to the store. Like, I got you. Like, I got stop. Look, you did talk.
Wait, I'm curious about. Wait. I'm curious about.
You did talk. It is in return.
Relax. I'm curious about. Wait, Jin, hold on. I'm curious about Shinra's response towards Infinity's argument.
Yeah, I'm saying it's in return, but basically,
real quick. A moderator is not just someone who mutes and unmutes, brother. You're the person who's supposed to keep.
Bro, I can't.
I don't know why I'm getting muted, but you're someone who's supposed to keep the progression of the debate smoothly. Meaning that when there's a lack of clarity, for example, I should be able to answer. Especially for the judge. So by essentials, hold on, what I take essentials to mean here is just the defining features in which are in comparison to accidentals in which are not granted in virtue of you being you, but granted in virtue of you, or I apologize, not granted in virtue of you being you, but rather granted in virtue of something else, meaning that they're not necessary for the entity. This is just a conventional view of what essentials and accidentals are. So I don't know if you want me to amp you or something, but just ask that. So Archie and Gina, is there understanding when it comes to the definitions for the two?
Yeah, I mean, I heard.
Okay, thank you. So look.
Okay, wait. Can you repeat the definition, please? Sorry, I'm not cut off when I continue.
I just told you the definition.
Well, didn't hear.
Why don't you guys just fucking stop this? No one can talk on it. Just have a conversation, like interact with each other.
No. He's a human. He's a human.
I'm fine with that.
Look at him. Look how happy he's
I don't know who this other nigga is. He sounds like he's been, other than the insults, he's been chill so far. I don't think he's just gonna fucking cut you off at any point. So if you guys just have a conversation and don't insult each other, I bet you it'll stay civil the whole time.
The guy has an addiction with cutting me off. Anyways, I need to go do
I don't know.
Yeah, I need to go do the dishes.
It sounds like he's not going to repeat the definition that we've